Well, hello and welcome to the final table topics of 2020. Today we have a very Halloween appropriate topic. We're going to hear about aliens, cults, and a shirtless Abraham Lincoln, weird stuff found in the USM archives. Jennifer Brannock is going to let us in on some of the secrets of what's hiding in the archives. Um, you all will be muted throughout. Please don't unmute until the end. If you have a question, don't hesitate to put it in the chat. We want to make sure that you all of your questions get recorded as you think of them. So if you see something weird and want to comment about it, please do so in the chat, and we'll loop back at the end and get all your questions answered. Excuse me. So Jennifer Brannock is a professor and curator of rare books and Mississippiana at the University of Southern Mississippi. She has a BA in history and a master's in library science from the University of Kentucky. In special collections at Southern Miss, she coordinates bibliographic instruction, supervises general reference activities, coordinates outreach efforts, curates exhibits, and conducts collection development and management activities for Mississippiana, rare books, and genealogy. Her research interests include special collections outreach, reference service, and popular culture. She is currently working on a book proposal about Mississippi author Con Sellers, his sleeves, publications, and mid-century ideas of gender and sexuality. And I hope that book proposal is successful because I want to read that book. So
I did put some Con Sellers in here just so everybody can see some of his
oh, good.
The fun things that he did.
Awesome.
So thanks so much for having me today. And, I have the chat up, so I'll try to, if you have a question about something, feel free to type it in, and I'll try to address the questions as they come in. But if not, we'll get them at the end. So what I'm going to do a little today is talk about some of the scary things in the collection, some of the what in the world is that stuff in the collection, and just the things that I find just funny. So, with so many donations we all get, no matter what library you're in, there's always things that you're like, why did this person collect all this? Why did they get all this? Because people are clearing out their house and just throwing everything into a box. And I think that's how we got a lot of the stuff we did. The other half of the stuff are just things that, for instance, I like to collect. For my collection development policies, I work really closely with students to see what their research interests are. And recently, there's been a lot of interest in cults and a lot of interest in aliens, and not too many things about Abraham Lincoln, especially shirtless Abraham Lincoln, but those are kind of how we got a lot of the things that we did. And so along the way, as I'm showcasing different things, sometimes if there's an interesting story behind the donor behind it or something like that, I'll provide a little extra information. So as many of you all may know, we have the de Grumman Children's Literature Collection here at Southern Miss. And so it's one of the largest children's literature collections in the country, with 180, I think, thousand children's books and the manuscripts of 1,400 authors and illustrators. So it's got a lot of stuff. So because of that, they have just crazy amounts of things. And so they had all these weird, kind of Halloween books that are not, intended for children, but they're not really fun. They're very factual and kind of like, this is what happens at Halloween, and this is the history. But I thought the one on the right was interesting because it's, our American holidays, that it's going to make.
Oh wait, Jennifer, we're just looking at your first slide.
Oh, sharing is paused. Interesting. Okay, resume share. I'll keep an eye on that. Okay. Bring your shared window to the front. Okay, just a second. Okay. Let me do some. Okay. New share. Okay, are you seeing PowerPoint now? But just not shared. Okay, let me get it. Okay. And then, well, okay, do you see 2 books on Halloween now? Okay, I'll keep an eye on that. It looks like for some reason my screen sharing kind of goes off on me, so I'll keep an eye. So we do have these 2 Halloween books, and they're both from the 40s and 50s. And you know, you could tell they're not in the best. So a lot of our collections, as you know, is the case everywhere, are not in the best shape. But so that's why Halloween up top has a big piece of tape on it. But it's just kind of a, you know, fun to see these different books out there that are kind of the older discussions of Halloween, a little drier than what we're used to. Now these books, The Mysteries of the Unknown, and I don't know if people remember, I remember these as a kid. They were put out by Time Life Books, and they would sell them on TV, and you could get the whole series of The Mysteries of the Unknown, where you'd have one on, this is the one on hauntings and mysterious creatures. They'd also have one on UFOs or, you know, like extraterrestrial stuff and just all kinds of different ghosts, things like that. You know, the hauntings book was in the Child Lit collection, and it just so happened that in addition to collecting children's literature stuff, they also collect whatever the author, like the author's personal library. And so some Child Lit author had hauntings. Now mysterious creatures I bought. We have a small collection development fund, and we had, you know, a couple semesters, we had a lot of people who were big into creatures like the Honey Island swamp monster, for instance, which is out of, I think, Louisiana. And we had someone working on that. So I was trying to get kind of contextual stuff that would help. And, you know, you can get these online for like $5. I mean, they're pretty inexpensive, and they're just beautifully illustrated. And really, I forgot how great the series is. Yeah, Katrina, you know, I love looking through them. I mean, you know, I might have bought a couple extra ones just to just to see all the pictures. So in the, I guess the 60s, 70s, 50s, 60s, it was 60s and 70s. I think it was 66 to 71. There was the TV show Dark Shadows. And so this is a book, and it was like a, you know, a soap opera, kind of a gothic soap opera about this Barnabas Collins, who was a vampire. So they decided to do a joke book, which is very not in line with Dark Shadows. But as you can see, the jokes are pretty bad. You know, how does Barnabas open the key to his house? He uses a skeleton key. Ooh. You know, why does Barnabas like to bite airplane pilots? Because he says they make him high. You know, that's for the adults. That one is, I guess. You know, so these are the different things that. So I remember finding this one years ago, and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Because even though I don't know a lot about Child Lit. I know nothing about Child Lit. Just to be able to find this kind of in the collection really made me happy. So I looked up stuff that we had like on witchcraft and stuff. So I was like, well, I wonder what we have, because I'd never done any searches to see what kind of materials we have. And then I came across this book, The Feminist Book of Lights and Shadows. And so this was put out in 1976 in Venice, California. And it was a part, so it is a book about like Wicca, feminist Wicca. And you can see that, so it was donated by a woman whose collections we got, because in 65 and 66, she worked in the Delta on civil rights activities. And it just so happened that, so she worked with her husband there, and then they divorced. And then in the 70s, she became heavily involved in the feminist and lesbian movements. And so we ended up, you know, she didn't think we wanted this stuff. I mean, I love the civil rights stuff, but to have this kind of materials are kind of fun too. So you see on here all of her notes that she took, you know, ritual around birthing, big, full babies, bellies, moons, you know, so she provides a lot of fun stuff there. But it's just a cool book to have this kind of whole feminist perspective of kind of witchcraft or Wicca. So I saw Hitler make black magic. This is a weird little booklet. So it's like 40 pages. And so if you go, I have found, maybe you all have determined this too, that if you have Amazon Prime and you go to the look on their videos, they have a lot of really kind of horrible video, like low quality, documentaries and stuff. And one of them that my colleague recommended to me was all about, oh, you need to look at the one about, witchcraft and Hitler. I'm like, whatever. And then I found that we had this book. So this is a guy, Thane, who claims to have known Hitler and talked about Hitler's involvement in black magic. Like, so before he would make any kind of decisions, he would have to see his astrologer. There were different symbols that he incorporated, of course, because of the black magic, and he had always had, people around him doing all this stuff, and that they did incantations and things together. I was like, well, this is kind of fun. And then he said that Hitler, used Richard Wagner's music a lot in World War II, and kind of as a nationalism thing. Well, in the booklet, he says that Hitler and Wagner were friends. Wagner died like in the late 1800s, so he and Hitler were not friends. So it makes me doubt, if Hitler made black magic or not. But it's a really kind of fun, just kind of weird book. I have not watched the Hitler witchcraft documentary, but my coworker likes it. I don't know what to think about that though. Now, I just saw that Christina wrote that the Budapest original pamphlet. Oh, I guess I don't know who she is, so that's awesome that someone knows. That's really cool. So it makes me want to look at see what other things we have of hers. But it's a really that's a really fun collection. And we have do a side note, the with that Sue Sojourner with her lesbian and feminist collections, we also have all of her manuscript papers that haven't been processed yet, and I'm really looking forward to getting into those. Spectropia. Now, this is one of my favorite things, and this is in the de Grummond collection. And so this was put out in 1866 out of London, and it was put out as a response to spiritualism. So spiritualism was when people would conduct seances to talk to ghosts and people from beyond to find out about things. I know there's more to it than that, but that's kind of the general shtick of it. And so one thing I will say though, I was on vacation about 5 years ago, and at a table next to us, these people started talking to me and my husband, and we're like, oh, come join us. So you do the original chit chat like you do. It's like, so, where you live? And they're like, Australia. And I was like, what do you do? She goes, well, I am the leader of a spiritualist movement in Australia. And I was like, oh, okay. And then we started talking some more, and I was like, and then I kind of realized, because, in contemporary life, spiritualism is not something you see too often, but I never got to ask her about it, but I did look her up later, and she was telling the truth. So this book here, in the beginning pages, you see this very technical, very scientific response to really what your eye's seeing. This is how your eye works, and this is why you're seeing ghosts, because it's all kind of an optical illusion. And so they break it all down like this. And it's probably about a 20-page, treatise on this. My mom hates that word treatise, so I try to use it around her a lot. So treatise. And then, so to prove the point, the rest of the book are just a series of plates. And so I'll show you some examples, and then we'll try it out. So, so you see we have these series of plates of, so the one on the right with the purple hand, you see under the hand, there's a little circled dot. So your job is so they say, well, if you stare at that dot for 30 seconds and then look at a white wall, then you will see the ghost there. And it just shows you that's not really a ghost. It's just an optical illusion. And the image on the left, which is a little blurrier, you can see that the dot is under the ghost's chin. So I thought we would try this out, and with this guy here, and I blew it up so we could all do this. And what I'll do is so for 30 seconds, and I tried to do it again. I was doing it yesterday, and you will blink, because even though you think you can stare at a screen for 30 seconds like that, it's hard because of all the light. And then then look at a wall. So you may want to identify your white wall, your clear wall now to look at. And then let's go ahead and start, and I'll tell you when to look at the wall. Okay, ready, go. We've got 10 more seconds. And look at your wall. Kind of stare at it a little bit. Oh, there it comes. So it's kind of like just a lit, mine's kind of pinky, a lit thing. And so you see the kind of the light, the way it does that. So this entire book is all about that. So it's a lot of fun. You can imagine, when we found it. I think the same day we found this, we were talking about things that we did as kids, just weird things. Did you all ever do the thing where you stand in a doorway and put your hands like this and push it really hard for 30 seconds? Because it was all the 30-second thing. So if you stand in a doorway and go like this and hold your arms against it for 30 seconds and then step out, your arms float up. Woo! So we would do that. We did that maybe that afternoon at work. So if you have time to, kill, want to have a, good team building exercise, and maybe just have everybody stand in doorways and apply pressure. Now, this is a newer thing. So this is a journal called The Inner Chamber of the Science of Mental Physics. So probably about 2 years ago, when we have professors move out of their offices, often they will just leave stuff behind, put a note on it and say, give to the library. So this professor, and I don't even know what department he was in. It wasn't philosophy or religion, but he had probably about 5 or 6 years of this journal, The Inner Chamber of the Science of the Mental Physics. And one of my coworkers saw it on a book truck over in Cook, kind of, over in the main library, for maybe the book sale or something. They said, well, I bet Jennifer's gonna want this, because she knows me well. But and so I got this, and I'm like, what in the world is this? So if you look it up, the mental physics, let's see. So the title now is called The Science of Mental Physics. The place still exists. So it is located in Joshua Tree, California. And it's very hippy dippy. This is kind of the start of the cult section of the presentation today. So this, even though this isn't necessarily culty, it's a little culty, but it's more new agey than culty. So it was started by a British guy named Edwin John Dingle, and the description of it is a universalist spiritual development technique based on a vegetarian diet, pranayama, which is just a form of breathing, and development of extrasensory perception. So that's like ESP and telepathy and stuff like that. So it's a combination of magic powers, breathing techniques, and eating vegetables. So that's kind of, that's, I'm sure if anybody here is a mental physician, then I am sorry. I don't mean to offend, but that's kind of how I see it all break out. So they ended up, he had gone to Asia, Dingle did, and had supposedly Tibetan monks had taught him a special way of breathing that restored life and did different stuff. So he came to the United States, and after the 1920s, he started teaching about this mental physics thing. And then over the years, he just had, they claim, I think he had 400,000 followers, at one point. And he had some land outside of Joshua Tree in California, where he built a big retreat that is still there. And it was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright's son. So, and supposedly Frank Lloyd Wright had, involvement in it as well. So it's really kind of it's a really interesting thing. And so this is in the 1920s, I think, is when he came to the United States. And then I think he built a place in the 50s. And again, I mean, if you just look up the science of mental physics, it'll take you to their webpage and see what's all there. But it's a really kind of cool thing. So I try to, because again, as I mentioned earlier, we have students who are all into cults nowadays. So this is one thing I, push them toward, but it's still a little too, I think it's a little too new agey for a lot of people to, and it's not like Jim Jones, or anything that people think are kind of fun. So again, I had students into cults, and I was like, well, let's see if I can find a cult in Mississippi. And there are no, I have not found any Mississippi cults. So if you know of any Mississippi cults, let me know. But I did find one in Georgia called the Nuabians. So the Nuabians, and this is a recent, I mean, they were around there in the 90s, 1990s. So they were originally based out of New York, I believe the Bronx. It was led by a guy named Malachi York, who was a DJ, but also a religious leader. It's funny, even on his religious pamphlets, which these are covers of, on the back, it'll still say something about his DJing, opportunities. So if you need a DJ, you can get Malachi to come. So he was in New York for, most of his life, for his early years. But he's a bad guy. And so he was kind of he had some, claims brought against him of child abuse and rape and just a whole slew of things. So he decided at that point to take his congregation and move to Georgia. So they packed up all these New Yorkers and took them to middle of nowhere, rural Georgia, where they created a modern Egyptian world. So they built pyramids there. They had, everybody wore headdresses and stuff. And they created this whole mythology around his teachings. So you can see the volume on the left is Halloween, the Evil One's Sabbath. And then you'll notice the other one, the Ancient Egyptian Materialization Rites. And they spell Egyptian like that, which is kind of interesting. His text is really, you can't understand it. So even though I mean, he had a lot of followers, and and another component of his religious idea, of course, he thought he was God. So that's kind of where the cult comes in, that he was God, and so everybody had to, bow down to him. But he, it was also a Black nationalist organization, which talked oftentimes about moving to Africa to set up a colony there. And so it really was a kind of a very complex organization. A funny story that I read somewhere about the group is that when they moved to Georgia, everybody was getting settled in, one guy stopped and said, "Where's the subway?" Because, these are New Yorkers. They're not used to driving. So, and they moved to a place where there's no public transportation to make this happen. So I think in the late 90s, Malachi did finally get arrested for his crimes. And there are a couple of interesting interviews online and kind of oral histories with people who were involved in this group. Now we're moving to the aliens. So as many of y'all know, October 11th, 1973 was the date when Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were supposedly abducted by aliens in Pascagoula, Mississippi. So, this is an extremely famous alien abduction case in the world of alien abductions because of the fact that, so after they had their experience, they didn't know what to do, and so they decided to go to Keesler because Keesler Air Force Base is down there. And of course, Keesler's like, so they're like, what do we do now? We feel like we need to tell someone. So they went to the local police department. And so the policemen, met with them and then left them in the room. And as is often the case, they had it recorded. So and during that time, the two abductees were just losing it because they'd experienced something and they were just trying to get it all out. So there's a lot of this stuff that's been recorded. One of the things that so because of that, it just became kind of a national sensation. So on the right is an LP cover, the front of an album, for a sermon that is from a preacher in Ocean Springs. And it's funny, I gave a talk where I mentioned this in there, and I mentioned the name of the church. I think it's a Baptist church in Ocean Springs. And one of the women there said, "Oh, that's my church." So I'm sure she went back and said, "Who was Bill Riddick, and why did he do this album on Visitors from Outer Space?" So Bill Riddick, Reverend Bill Riddick, a couple of weeks after the abduction, did a sermon in church, and he recorded it because, again, everybody knew this was a hot topic. Recorded it, and then made it available on LP. So this is the sermon, and you can listen to this on archives.org, and I think even YouTube has it. So if you want to listen to it there, and of course we have a copy, and I think I bought a personal copy. They had 2 copies on sale on eBay at the same time, and I was like, I've got to get them both because it was so rare. And then on the left, we have just a magazine that has a whole section just about the abduction. And that was about a year after, or 6 months after it happened. And so, this is just one of those things where, I knew about the abduction. And so I just have searches on eBay that I track. And so, because I don't know what's out there on this topic, I just wait for eBay to tell me this is what's out there. And I don't know. I remember Fire in the Sky, but I don't remember. I don't remember if was it about this. It may have been about this. Now, my brother. This is a funny story. He'd kill me if he. Oh, he's not here, so it doesn't matter. But when he was in high school, he and his friends. We grew up in a rural town in Kentucky, and so he and his friends would drive country roads looking for UFOs because that's what you do when you're a boy in a small southern town. So they would. He said one time, he swears, and even like 15 years later, I ran into one of the guys there, and he's like, "Oh no, we saw it. We saw something." So supposedly they popped over a hill, and there was a UFO, hanging out. And so they all jump out of the car. It's all boys. So they all jump out of the car, and they start right away. They're all sitting there. It's very silent. And then then they all started yelling "Fire in the Sky" at it because the movie had just come out. So they're all yelling "Fire in the Sky." Now, again, I think it's all a lie, but, it makes for a fun story. So Estes Perkle, I don't know if anybody has ever heard about Estes Perkle. He was a preacher in, let me make sure, I think it's New Albany, Mississippi. And So he was a preacher in New Albany, and especially into the late 50s, 60s, he became increasingly interested in anti-communism rhetoric and the way it related to religion. So he worked with this guy, Ron Ormond, to do a series of films. You can watch all these on YouTube. They are well worth the time. You might want to have a glass of wine to enjoy it fully. And you would... so he would do these films that were religious in nature, but very gory, very violent. So Ron Ormond was a director who was originally, I think he's Italian, but he has he changed his name, but he lived in, I think, Memphis or Nashville. And he survived not 1, but 2 plane crashes. So after the second one, he found God and, became more religious, and started doing these religious films. And that's when he got together with Estes. And so The Burning Hell is a very important one. I think this is the one, I get confused between the two, the two, but I think it's The Burning Hell, where a lot of it, so it's all filmed in Mississippi, so all the actors have Southern accents, even the Russians, the people who play the Russian officer. So there's one scene where there's a Russian officer, and he's talking to a little boy, and he's like, "Little boy, I'm going to kill you." And he says, "I love Jesus. Jesus," the little boy is, giving his religious faith and talking about Jesus and his love for Jesus. And then all of a sudden, and this is so like out of like a high school horror film, the Russian guy takes a knife and swings. And then the next shot is just a round object flying through the air, which is supposed to be, I guess, the poor little boy. But it is just so horribly done. And, there's like Caro syrup blood going everywhere. I mean, it's just a really touching thing. But what is interesting is that, and I'll show you some more things here, is that they would, and you can still, the organization is still around. So you can go online and find it, and they will send you recordings if you want to show it at church or whatever, if you want to have, have a showing. And so I was at a conference and I was talking about Popular Culture Association, which is a fun conference if it ever comes to New Orleans again. And I was talking about something else, and this guy comes up to me and he said, "Do you all have all the Estes Perkle stuff?" And I was like, "Well, yes, I do," because it's another, kind of odd area that I collect in. And he said he had just written his thesis on Estes Perkle right when I was getting everything. And he's like, "I already had, I was already done, so I didn't need any more." But but he was just like, he said that he grew up watching the movies and they scared him to death and really kind of scarred him a little bit. Now, so Tracy knows something about, so we'll have to tell us, Tracy.
Okay, so you're not going to believe this, but Ron Ormond is my great uncle.
No way.
Yes, he's actually, I think, my great great uncle. He was my grandmother's uncle. He was known as Uncle Vic. And
yes,
all the family was, his parents were from Sicily, and they came to Iota, Louisiana, had 4 kids, maybe 5. I think there's 4 girls and a boy. And then they moved to San Francisco. And so my grandmother didn't know him well, but it was so much fun to go to San Francisco and visit Uncle Vic. Anyway, so I was like, is this the guy that is that? Oh yeah, I looked him up. Yeah, that's him.
That's really, really cool.
Anyway, I'm related to this guy.
So awesome. That is really, really cool. And, I looked him up because he did something called the something swamp monster, something of that name. So if you go on YouTube, you can see the opening for the film, and it takes place in New Orleans. So you get to see New Orleans kind of in probably the 50s or 60s or so. But it might be the early 60s. But the opening scene, the first person who dies in it by the swamp monster is a guy from the backing drummer of Johnny Cash, his band. So that's really kind of a fun thing. But Tracy, now I can use that. I was like, there's a librarian in Mississippi who is Ken. But it's really cool. And so so Estes Perkle, again, we have a lot of his albums and sermons. A lot of preachers put their sermons on LP and sold them. So I really like looking for those. And so if footmen tire you, what will horses do? This is another film that Ron and Estes did together. And I love it here. You have the communism and the Christian, they're going to race it out. And then, of course, we have a detail here, all of the bad influences. So sex magazines, mini skirts, fashions, alcoholic beverages, modern music, situation ethics. And then, so some of the things that are quoted in a lot of his stuff. So Bible stores replaced by some Jack and the Beanstalk stuff, something of the Men of Mars going to invade this world, some Frankenstein monsters to terrorize your kids. And of course, McGuffey Readers, the only approved book. I love the television, children idolizing Tarzan, who is 5'6", undressed. He does, and the exclamation points are his. He doesn't have much clothes on, and every boy and girl feels to be a hero. They got to pull their clothes off. And then, of course, how young girls have to, have sex to be cheerleaders or whatever. And then my favorite one here is Ed Sullivan, that he's competing with God by hosting his show on Sunday nights. So it's just, Estes is a really interesting person. And of course, with the films, adds an even better look at him. Now, Inside World, this is something that, Inside World is a magazine that one of my coworkers found, because we have so much stuff and sometimes you don't have enough time to go through everything. And so this was in Mississippi periodicals, and it was bound in buckram, so it wasn't very noticeable. But Inside World was the publication put out by inmates in Parchment Penitentiary. So this one is from 1950, and it's really, really cool. So we have about 15, 20 years of this. And so you see within it, you see the illustrations that the inmates did. You have poetry, updates on sports and athlete, kind of things that are going on, like a shout out section. It's just really a cool, fun thing. And we've had, especially nowadays, it's real, even though these is the ones we have are from the 50s and 60s, it's so relevant now that prison reform is kind of, come up a little more. It's really relevant and just a really unique, unique thing. Now, this is something that I think visual with Christmas upon us, and I just think it's a great visual. So, of course, we have a lot of civil rights materials. And so this is a flyer that was sent out, not in Mississippi necessarily. It was mainly sent out in the Northeast for $5 donations to buy Christmas meals for people in Mississippi. And it was put up by Dick Gregory, who was a very famous activist and comedian, African-American. And so you can see at the bottom here, $5 buys a family Christmas dinner in memory of Medgar Evers, Mickey Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodwin. So this was probably the Christmas of '64 is my guess. But they ended up getting the money and having all these turkeys. And so in our collections, I found elsewhere that they had the addresses of who was going to, like what churches were going to orchestrate the drops and stuff like that. So they ended up doing, I think logistically, it was a little bit of a nightmare because turkeys aren't something that, can stay out in, unrefrigerated area for very long. So, but it was kind of an interesting initiative. I just think this is weird. It's just a telegram. Burns Mantle was a theater critic kind of thing. So it's like a thank you thing, but it's just got a weird face. And I've read it like 5 times and it makes no sense. I think it's asking, do you want an order from some of their stuff? But I just don't know. But it's just a weird little thing. Yeah, the sample smile. So this guy was Patrick Mahoney. He had no Mississippi collection, but no Mississippi connection, but we have all of his papers here, which I think is weird. But he was the assistant to Maurice Maeterlinck, who won a Nobel Prize for Literature in the 20s, I think, or the teens. And then he had a lot of connections in Hollywood, and he was English, but he had some royalty connections, but then also like hang out with like Eamon de Valera, who was the Irish nationalist Republican guy. So he's just kind of a weird guy. But in his collection, he had all these books. A lot of them were signed and had, letters from the people who wrote the books. And one of them is this book by Kenneth Rexroth, who is a famous kind of pre-beat writer. He was, I think they called him kind of the grandfather or the father of the beats in the 50s, but he was much older than all those guys. But he would lead a lot of the poetry readings and stuff like that. So come to find out, Kenneth Rexroth rented a place from this Patrick Mahoney guy. And so this is a letter saying, sure, we'll rent your space in Santa Barbara, but you need to get all your junk out, basically is what he says. And when this came to the university, Patrick Mahoney added a little note that said, here's the book that I'm sending. He was renting my house in Santa Barbara. He did so and stole many of my books, which I still miss terribly. I wish I'd never met him. Some would call him a good bookkeeper, eh? So he had his little, little things there. And this was an interesting donation because we just don't know how it got here. I mean, reading through the letters, he often mentioned this guy, what is it? Roger Pearson, who he's like, oh, Roger came to visit me. So Roger Pearson, this is all kind of, and I just learned about the existence of Roger Pearson maybe a couple years ago. He is a very, very far right scientist, I guess, who is, studies eugenics. So he is all about segregation and just, not a good guy. But the 60s in Mississippi, you know, especially USM, you know, the president here, Dr. McCain, actually hired Pearson to come here and to start the anthropology program, or just be the chair of the new anthropology department. And so he brought this known eugenicist here to do all this. It was all crazy. But for some reason, I think that Roger and Pearson was only here for 2 or 3 years. But in the meantime, he brought all these like weird, you know, far right guys to work at USM. And but I think that there was a friendship between Mahoney and Pearson, or maybe a little more, because I think they were both single. But that's just a mystery to figure out later. So Bumpsy's the golf ball kids. You know, there are so many children's books that are weird that I can't talk about them all, so I just picked the one. This was put out by the Roycrofters, who were a big time like American arts and crafts movement organization. So they did beautiful books and furniture that was very, you know, kind of Frank Lloyd Wright-ish, you know. I mean, it was very kind of beautiful stuff. But they did this weird book about this little boy who's a caddy and meets all these golf ball kids. And then so they're just kind of around being weird. It's just a very creepy book. Just like any children's books that has photographs, I think are very creepy. I think this is right up there. Like the Lonely Doll. Oh, you know, that is just a weird, creepy book. So we have a lot of cookbooks here. So I just wanted to show you a couple of these. This was, I found this one the other day and I put it on social media and everybody's like, oh my God, I don't know if I should be offended or not, you know, but Baptist Dishes Worth Blessing. And then later in the day, I found the favorite recipes of Catholic women. So there's a little battle royale going on between the Baptists and the Catholics. And so it's so fun to look through all these cookbooks, because we do have, you know, we collect the Mississippi cookbooks, and just to see some of these other things that Mississippians have in their collection. Super Mothers, Cooking with Grass. So this is I got this probably about 4 or 5 years ago from a donor at the coast who goes around to estate sales and gets cookbooks for me. So he just brings random stuff occasionally and kind of waves, and then, you know, he's a funny guy. He just shows up and he's like, hey, here you go. All right, thanks, see ya. Just kind of leaves. But so I was looking through the donations and I was like, oh, Super Mothers Cooking with Grass. I said, okay, what's this about? You know, and I was looking at it. It's just another little pamphlet cookbook. So it's from 1971 from California. But then I started looking a little closer at it, and you see all the recipes, and, you know, it's the corn muffins, but then you see an eighth a cup of grass. But I started noticing through the cookbook, and again, I was still not there yet, that I started noticing that it had asked for like a lid of grass. And I was like, whoa. I said, you know, I was in college once, but then I realized right away that, you know, lids they used to use like Hellman's mayonnaise lids to measure marijuana in the 60s and 70s. So you'd have a lid, or a half a lid was the size of a mayonnaise lid, I think. So that's what got me thinking, so yeah, we are getting ready for Initiative 65, all right, woo. But so this was a marijuana cookbook that was owned by someone at the coast. And if you notice throughout, and this is just 2 pages of it, but it has all these Southern recipes everywhere. So it's weird. Why would a hippie cookbook from the 70s have all these Southern recipes in it, you know? So I bring this out a lot for freshman students in English classes, because first of all, it's fun to watch them figure out what it is eventually. I mean, sometimes you get the ones that are so cool, the kids, and they're like, it's weed, you know, and they figure it out right away. And the other ones are like, do they get it off the lawn? Do they have to go out and cut it fresh, or can they just mow it, you know? So they talk about, you know, like lawn grass lawn. So it's really kind of a cute thing. Again, we have like stuff fun like menus, and this is from restaurant, you know, Soda Fountain in New Orleans. And let's see. Okay. And then I also brought some different menus. So we have, this is from Beauvoir, 1942. I love this. I always love looking at these old menus to see what people ate, because a lot of it's not very different than what we do today. But I love that chilled celery is an item, you know, because celery is something that most people avoid. But then it was like a delicacy. It's like, we've got the chilled, you know, the chilled celery ready for you. We have Camp Shelby menu. And of course, you know, the prices are great. And I think this may have been World War II is what I'm thinking. But what was cool about this menu is that they had a little insert. So they had an Italian food, special that night. So you could get different things from this menu as well. So I told you I was going to bring some Consellers. So here's Consellers. So Consellers was from Shibuya, Mississippi. He wrote under 100 pen names, and Rick Arana being one of them. Most of his novels were books intended for, male readers. Most of them were kind of sexy. I mean, not like today, not like romance novels today or anything like that. I mean, it's very tame considering. And then, but most of it was just extremely misogynistic and just really, anti-women. So you see on the left, the front cover, a Big Broad was the name of this one. It was about a lady wrestler, a match for any man in or out of the ring. And then we're fortunate with this one because in addition to having his book collection that I've grown out over the years, that we have the original artwork from the artist who did covers. And, I think this is a lost form because so many books now, just have kind of a graphic designer in there, whereas back in the day, you'd have someone actually paint a cover, which is really, really cool. So in addition to doing kind of things like works like this, he did the novelization for Dallas. So when Dallas was being filmed, the TV show, they sent Con the scripts for the first 5 episodes, which we have. And then he wrote the book that accompanied the series when it came out. And so he made buku because poor guy was just writing horrible, sleazy kind of, crappy stuff. And then all of a sudden he got Dallas, which was great. So you can see that, I try to collect editions. So, the English version's in the middle, then you have French on the left, and then Hebrew on the right. And it's just kind of a fun little anomaly. He was quite the guy. And you can see too how I love the tie-in books. So this semester I'm working on kind of hunting down any tie-in books by Tennessee Williams, that have pictures of the movie stars on front of it doing, their stuff. So that's it does, yeah. Ferns for Modern Living, and you're going to look at this. This is just my little weird thing. So we get certain donations, and I look through them, and there's certain books that kind of stick with me, and I don't know why. And this is one of them. I'm horrible to plants. Ferns, I think, are impossible to keep alive. But this book I love because it's like 50 pages of just ferns. And it's hard to photograph ferns in so many different ways. Thanks, Katrina. Thanks for coming. But I do want to give credit to the photographer here who did take about 120 photos of ferns. So Saturday Night Live, we have the papers of David Sheffield, who was a USM grad. He's a Mississippian. He lives at the coast. But he was also head writer at Saturday Night Live in the early 80s. So this is a copy of the presentation script for his last episode, and they got it bound in leather and put his name on the bottom of it so that he could have that when he left. So you can see here, this was May 14th, 1983. The host was New York Mayor Ed Koch. The musical guest was Kevin Rowland Dexy's Midnight Runners, Come On Eileen, which I always act as classes. I'm getting to the point now where my pop culture references don't translate. So when I said, okay, who sang, what did they sing? And you might have one person, but so we have that here. What's interesting about this, you'll see that Eddie Murphy was on the cast at the time. This was the one season, I think, that Julia Louis-Dreyfus was on the show. This is where she met her husband, Brad Hall. But what really was lasting is the friendship between Eddie Murphy and Sheffield. So you see the episodes in this one, or the sketches, are Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, Dracula. Those were some kind of well-known ones. And then you also see this was actually a used script. So you get to see how they rewrote it. And, SNL is so cutthroat that from what, you read, that, your sketch can be thrown right before it goes on. And so you can see how they kind of wrote comedy to make it funnier. And so David Sheffield and Eddie Murphy became good friends in this. And so they wrote and produced and did Coming to America together, and The Nutty Professors 1 and 2, And evidently later this, I was looking this up to see if anything else had happened. In December, they're coming up with Coming to America. So it's the to instead of to. So I guess it's going to be a sequel. It's going to have Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall and all those people from the day. Here's our shirtless Abe. So Abraham Lincoln was known as a wrestler before he became Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. According to Carl Sandburg's biography of him, Honest Abe once challenged an entire crowd of onlookers after dispatching an opponent. Quote, "I am the big buck of this lick. If any of you want to try it, come on and wet your horns." So Abe was a bit of a, this is like MMA, MMA of the 1840s or whatever. And I love it too that they just clip this out from a news, like a front cover of a lowbrow magazine, and then put it in like a granny frame, because my grandmother had tons of those little frames. And then on the right we have the gun, a depiction of the gun that was used to kill Lincoln, just decoupaged. We have a lot of decoupaged items. There's a life mask of Lincoln. We also have life hands, which is just equally as creepy. I wanted to point this out because it's funny. I was just looking through something about Camper Park, which is where the zoo is in Hattiesburg. And so you can see here that Mrs. Saliba stated that September 1st, she will be unable to run the concession stand. One of her daughters said she could operate on weekends only. The man selling peanuts and popcorn at the zoo cages is hurting the sales of the concession stand. This was reported by Mrs. Saliba. And then below, they had donated at the zoo several pounds of nuts, a baby alligator, and a rabbit. And then I'm just going to go through quickly some photos we have from the collections. So these are all from a local photographer who did photographs in Mississippi or in Hattiesburg, the 50s through maybe the 70s. So these are storefront photos. So the first one's from Fine Brothers department store, and then the Hercules display at the Sears building. This is weird, but it was a photograph used for an advertisement for a Frigidaire air conditioner. The poor dog looks scared to death. And the lighting there reminds me of college Jennifer in photography classes with my light that was just a little too bright. The shadows are a little harsh. And then this is the junior auxiliary at the Jitney Jungle in 1955 for a little benefit sale that they had. This is an antiphonor that we have. It's from the 1600s. It was used in a Spanish monastery by monks, and it's all it's hand done on vellum, so on animal skin, and it's just this really cool thing. It's really huge, and so I have students are always scared of it. I have one guy that he said, "Oh, I'm not getting near that. Satan's going to come out." I mean, he was joking, but it's still kind of a cool item. And then these are some USM photos. So this is USM basketball 1914. And 1915. So you can see the difference. They had 5 members, and they're a little more hardcore here, This was called the Bow Knot Club. So they all have bows, but they're also single ladies. So they're whooping it up. And then that's all we've got for me. Took us right up to the end there. So does anybody have any questions?
Jennifer, there was a question about the year of let's see, it was Christina, do you remember what that you asked the question? It was about the year of something, and I can't remember, the mental physics pamphlet.
That particular pamphlet was, let's see, let me scroll back. I'm sure I could do this in an easier way. Just to have a recap of everything. I think this was a weird thing. I remember that. I think this is from the 50s. Probably the 60s. 50s, 60s. But I can look for sure and let you know. Now, this is one of those things, the same thing goes with cookbooks and stuff. They don't have dates. a lot on some of these things. I'm like, why would you not put it like a cookbook? It's like you need to put the location, what the church is. I mean, because I can't even find cities half the time on cookbooks. So.
Well, there was a lively chat throughout, and I wish. I mean, there's a lot of like, wow, whoa, terrifying, hilarious, and of course now at the end we don't remember what those comments were about, but such good stuff, Jennifer, such good stuff. And I wasn't kidding about Dallas. I've started rewatching it. It's amazing. It's so much worse and yet better than you might remember. It is a wild ride. Nothing makes sense. Time, there is no concept. 4 days will go by and then they're like, it's 12 o'clock. Anyway, it's bizarre. But yes, that was very exciting.
No, it's very exciting. The Ron Ormond connection is the
I wish I knew more about him. But he was, he was just Uncle Vic, and then he's only 15 years older than my grandmother. So they moved off and she didn't really know him well, but I definitely will be telling my dad. I think he knew like, oh yeah, he made some films. That's like the extent of what the family knows. But now you have exposed my family secrets.
Well, I heard that he had some connection to Ed Wood. I don't know if they were just contemporaries or what the.
Well, I know what I'll be spending the rest of my Halloween Eve doing. Oh, this is hilarious. Sydney has said he has to sleep with the light on this weekend. He's seeing pink ghosts and he can't put his arms down. So.
No, yeah, make sure you all do that. Go find a doorway and just push for 30 seconds and step out. So, as children, we amuse ourselves in weird ways.
Well, since there don't seem to be any other questions, but I know that everyone enjoyed it because this was hilarious and interesting and weird, my favorite combination of things. But so thank you so much for doing this for us today, Jennifer. And if anyone has any questions about like they want to come see these items, can they just pop into the archive, make an appointment? How do y'all do things?
You can just pop on in. We're open Monday through Friday from 9 to 4. But if you know you're coming, you can let me know and I can pull out a bunch of stuff for y'all.
Okay. I want everything from this pulled.
I'll start today.
Yeah. Very, very exciting. I loved it. All right. Thanks everyone for coming. And thank you again, Jennifer.
Thanks you all.